terrifying school horror stories, I never believed in ghosts, spirits, or anything paranormal until that night. I was a typical student, skeptical, grounded in reality, but everything changed when our school decided to celebrate its centenary with a night at the old building, a structure cloaked in whispers and chilling legends. The school, with its ivy-clad walls and moss-strewn steps, had always been a source of eerie fascination. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the corridors, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Our task was to gather artifacts from various classrooms for a time capsule, a tribute to decades of education and mystery. Armed with only flashlights, my friends and I split up. I headed towards the basement, an area rumored to be haunted by the first principal, a stern, unforgiving figure who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The air grew colder as I descended, the steps groaning under my weight. Each breath appeared as a puff of vapor, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I reached the bottom, flicking my flashlight around the cluttered space. It was filled with old furniture, dust-covered books, and discarded teaching aids. As I rummaged through a pile of old maps and photographs, I heard it, a soft, melancholy whistling. The tune was old, hauntingly familiar yet impossible to place. Turning around, I saw nothing but the endless stacks of forgotten school supplies. I convinced myself it was just the wind, or perhaps my imagination, fueled by the adrenaline and stories I'd been fed. However, when I found a small, old-fashioned key among the papers, the whistling stopped abruptly, as if I had triggered a silent alarm. Clutching the key, I felt an inexplicable urge to find what it unlocked. The air thickened with suspense as I traced my steps back through the corridors, the light from my flashlight flickering ominously. The silence was suffocating, every creak and crackle of the old building amplifying my growing anxiety. Finally, I arrived at a decrepit door hidden behind some newer renovations. It was as if the school wanted to forget what lay behind it. I inserted the key, the lock clicking open with a resistance that spoke of long disuse. Pushing the door open, I peered inside, my heart pounding in my ears. The room was stark, with nothing but a chalkboard covered in undisturbed dust and a few rows of ancient desks. On the board, written in what looked like dried blood, was a single date, the day the principal had vanished. I approached, intrigued and terrified, my fingers brushing against the cold, gritty surface. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam dancing wildly. There was no wind, no force I could blame. I was alone, or so I thought. A cold whisper floated across the room. "Why do you disturb me?" Frozen in place, I tried to locate the source of the voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. My flashlight flickered again, this time going out completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the modern glow a weak defense against the suffocating dread. As my phone light steadied, I saw her. The apparition of a stern-looking woman, her eyes hollow, her expression twisted in anger and sorrow. "You have the key," she said, her voice a chilling mix of accusation and longing. "He took everything from me, even my life." I realized then that she thought I was someone else, perhaps the one responsible for her fate. Desperate to explain, to plead. I found my voice. I'm not who you think I am. I'm just a student, here for the centenary. She advanced, and the temperature dropped further. Each step she took left a trace of frost on the wooden floor. My breath became visible, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. Prove it, she demanded, her voice echoing off the walls. Prove your innocence or join me in my eternal solitude. Panic set in as I scrambled to think. What could I offer to appease a spirit? Then I remembered the key. Extending it towards her, I spoke with as much courage as I could muster. This key. I found it. Maybe it's what you need? Her transparent hand reached out, fingers inches from the metal. Her touch never came. Instead, she vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving behind the cold and the key floating in midair before it clattered to the ground. I grabbed the key, ran from the room, and didn't stop until I burst into the moonlight, gasping for air. My friends found me outside, my face pale, my eyes wild with fear. I tried to explain, but words failed me. They had found nothing but dust and silence in their own explorations. We decided to leave, to abandon the night's adventure as an unspoken agreement. Yet, as we walked away, I looked back at the old building. A figure watched from the window, her presence a silent confirmation of the night's horrors. And there she remains, a part of the school as much as the stones and ivy. My friends joke about that night, but I know what I saw, what I felt. The terror isn't just a story, it's real, and it's waiting, always just a lock away. Months passed since that harrowing night, but the memory clung to me like a stubborn shadow. I tried to bury the incident under heaps of daily tasks and laughter, but solitude always brought the whispers back. The apparition of the stern woman haunted not just the school, but my dreams, weaving her icy gaze through my sleep. Returning to school after the holidays, the atmosphere seemed charged, electric with unspoken words. My friends chattered about exams and holidays, yet their eyes often darted to the old building, as if expecting it to breathe life. I knew I had to go back, to confront whatever remained there, or I would never find peace. One icy evening, when the fog lay thick over the grounds, I told my friends I needed to retrieve some books I'd left in my locker. Their concerned glances followed me as I made my way towards the old building. The air grew colder with each step, and the fog seemed to whisper, urging me back, warning me away. As I approached the familiar, daunting entrance, my heart raced, pounding against my chest as if trying to escape. The door creaked open with eerie anticipation. Stepping inside, the darkness enveloped me like a thick, oppressive blanket. My flashlight, a feeble beam in the consuming black, guided me back to that dreaded room. Back again? A voice hissed as the door swung shut behind me. It was not a question but an accusation, filled with icy malice. Turning slowly, I faced the darkness, my voice a mix of fear and defiance. Yes, I'm back. I need to understand why you haunt this place. Her laugh, a sound like cracking ice, filled the room. Understand? You seek understanding where there is only pain and betrayal. But since you dare return, perhaps you can help free me from my bonds. I steadied my breath, determined to face whatever came. "Tell me what I need to do. Help me help you." The temperature dropped further, and her form materialized from the shadows, more defined than before. She hovered over the ground, her face contorted with sorrow and rage. My life was stolen here, in this room, by deceit and greed. Find the truth. Expose it. Maybe then I can rest. But how? Where do I even start? I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the chilly air. Start with him, the one who replaced me. Look in his office. There's a box, hidden away. It contains his sins, she replied, her voice softening, tinged with a melancholic desperation. Armed with this new purpose, I left the room, the chill of her presence clinging to my back. I made my way to the current principal's office, a modern addition far from the old building's decay. The door was locked, but my determination lent me courage. Using a credit card, I managed to jimmy the lock, my actions fueled by a mix of fear and necessity. Inside, the office was starkly different from the rest of the school, lined with awards and certificates, a display of modern educational achievements. I searched meticulously, pulling out drawers and shifting papers. Finally, behind a false back in the last drawer, I found it, a small, dusty box. The lock was old, rusted, and it gave way under firm pressure. Inside, there were letters, photographs, and official documents, all seeming mundane until I came upon a faded letter, the handwriting elegant but hurried. It detailed a scandal, a cover-up involving the old principal, the woman who haunted the school. She had discovered financial misdeeds, threatening to expose them, but she vanished before she could. As I read, the air around me grew heavy, as if the room itself was absorbing the gravity of the revelations. I gathered everything, stuffing the documents into my bag. I knew what I had to do next. Suddenly, the door swung open, and the current principal stood there, his face a mask of shock and anger. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I stood my ground, holding the bag tightly. "I know about the cover-up, about what happened to her. It's all here." His face paled, then contorted with fury. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, kid. Give me that bag, and we might forget this happened." "No," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "I'm going to bring her justice." He lunged at me, but I dodged, rushing out of the office. I could hear him chasing after me, his footsteps thundering through the halls. My heart raced as I dashed towards the old building, the safest place to hide, strangely enough. Reaching the room, I slammed the door shut, barricading it with an old desk. Breathing heavily, I turned to find her waiting, her expression one of anticipation. "I found them," I gasped, holding up the bag. Her eyes, hollow and sad, fixed on the bag. "Then let's end this," she whispered. "Show them, expose the truth. Free me, and free this school from his corruption." The sound of footsteps approached, the principal's voice echoing through the halls, filled with threats and anger. I knew what I had to do. I had to expose the truth, not just for her, but for all the silent souls who suffered under his deceit. The principal's voice grew louder, closer, his anger reverberating against the ancient walls. I tightened my grip on the bag, its contents now a beacon of hope and danger. Behind the barricaded door, I felt her presence intensifying, as if drawing strength from the impending confrontation. "Open this door," he bellowed, his fists pounding against the wood. Each thud was a stark reminder of the power he wielded, not just physically but within the very fabric of the institution. Yet, his authority, once unchallenged, now seemed fragile, threatened by the truth I held. She floated closer to me, her form shimmering with a spectral light. "He cannot stop what is coming," she whispered, her voice a cold breeze in the stale air. "You must go beyond these walls, show them to the world." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. With the documents, I could dismantle his reign, restore her legacy. But first, I had to escape. The window in the room offered a narrow escape route. It was risky, but desperation lent courage to my decision. I turned to the window, pushing it open. The night air rushed in, the scent of rain and earth mingling with the mustiness of the room. Climbing onto the sill, I glanced back at her. "I'll bring justice," I promised, a vow that felt sacred in her presence. Jumping down, I landed awkwardly but managed to stay upright. My heart pounded as I sprinted across the school grounds, the principal's shouts fading behind me. The darkness was a cloak, shielding me from immediate pursuit, but I knew it wouldn't be long before he would alert others. As I ran, the wind seemed to whisper encouragements, the leaves rustling like quiet applause. The school's boundary wall loomed ahead, a physical barrier between the corrupt sanctuary behind me and the hopeful freedom ahead. Scaling the wall took every ounce of my resolve, the rough bricks scraping against my palms. Once over, I landed in the shadow of the trees lining the street outside. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my mind racing as fast as my heart. I had to find someone I could trust, someone who could help expose the truth. The local newspaper, a small but fiercely independent outlet, seemed the best bet. Navigating the dimly lit streets, I kept to the shadows, wary of any sign of pursuit. Reaching the newspaper office, I hammered on the door, my desperation clear in the urgency of my knocks. A light flicked on, and the door creaked open, revealing the bleary-eyed journalist known for his investigative tenacity. "What's this about?" he asked, peering at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "I have evidence of corruption at the school," I panted, thrusting the bag toward him. "Please, you have to help me expose it." His eyes widened as he digested the seriousness of my claim. Ushering me inside, he wasted no time, spreading the documents across his cluttered desk. As we pored over the contents, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This is big," he murmured, his professional instinct kicking in. "We need to verify everything, but this could blow the lid off the whole operation." Hours passed as we worked through the documents, his phone calls to contacts and colleagues echoing in the cramped office. Dawn was breaking when we finally leaned back, exhausted but resolute. "We'll run the story," he declared, a determined glint in his eyes. but you need to stay safe. He'll be looking for you." Nodding, I felt a mix of relief and fear. "I'll go back to the school," I decided, feeling an inexorable pull towards the place where it all began. I need to confront him, once and for all. As I stood to leave, the journalist handed me a small recorder. "Take this. Whatever happens, make sure it's heard." Grasping the recorder, I felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation. The journey back to the school was a blur, my mind focused solely on the face-off that awaited. The school grounds were eerily quiet as I approached, the first rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the facade. Entering the building, I felt a surreal calmness envelop me, the weight of the night's revelations solidifying into a steely resolve. As I made my way to the principal's office, I could hear the faint sound of voices. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, recorder in hand, ready to face whatever awaited. The principal looked up, surprise registering on his face as our eyes met. "So, you've returned," he said slowly, standing up. His voice was calm, but I could detect the underlying menace. "Do you think you can change anything?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "With the truth." The tension in the room thickened, palpable as the morning mist outside. As we faced off, the stakes of our confrontation clear, I knew this was only the beginning. The battle for justice was just starting, and I was ready to fight it to the end. The room felt charged, an electric air of confrontation hovering between us. He regarded me with a mixture of disdain and apprehension, his once authoritative figure now reduced to a man cornered by his own misdeeds. "You think these papers will change anything?" he sneered, his voice a blend of anger and fear. "I've been running this school for years. Who do you think they'll believe?" I held up the recorder, its red light glaring like a warning. "They'll believe what they hear straight from your mouth," I responded, my voice firm and resolute. My finger hovered over the play button, ready to expose his guilt. His eyes flicked to the device, and his demeanor shifted. The arrogance melted away, replaced by a desperate, calculating look. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone softer, yet laced with venom. "Justice," I said simply. "For her, for all those you've wronged." He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "Justice? There's no justice here, only power and survival." As he spoke, a chill permeated the room. The shadows seemed to deepen, coiling around us like spectators to our standoff. Then, from the corner of the room, a faint whisper crept into the air, growing louder, a cold wind that smelled of damp and decay. "Justice," it echoed, her voice, the principal's long-gone predecessor, carrying a weight that had transcended her death. He froze, his eyes widening in terror as he spun towards the sound. Standing behind him was her apparition, more defined than ever, her presence undeniable and commanding. "You cannot run from the past, not anymore," she said, her voice the sound of a final verdict. I pressed play on the recorder, letting his earlier admissions fill the room, each word a nail in the coffin of his career. His face went pale, his defeat etched into every line of his body as the spectral figure advanced towards him. You've held this place in your corrupt grasp for too long. Her voice was both a lament and an accusation. As she approached, the room temperature dropped, frost creeping over the windows and walls, a physical manifestation of her icy grip on his fate. "I'm sorry," he stammered, falling to his knees, his words directed at both the specter and myself. "I didn't know she'd never rest." You thought wrong," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the surrealism of the confrontation. "And now you'll face the consequences." The ghostly figure reached for him, her hand passing through his shoulder. He shuddered, a scream caught in his throat as he experienced whatever cold, lonely agony she imparted. Then, just as quickly, she withdrew, her form dissipating into the air, leaving behind a room suddenly too big, too empty. He slumped forward, his confession recorded, his reign ended. I dialed the police, narrating the situation as calmly as possible. As I waited for them to arrive, I looked around the room, feeling the weight of history, the burden of souls wronged and now, perhaps, righted. When the police arrived, they found him still on his knees, a broken man surrounded by the damning evidence of his deeds. As he was led away, handcuffed and defeated, the sun broke through the clouds, its light cleansing the gloom of the school corridors. I stepped outside, the fresh air a balm to the night's terrors. The school would need to heal, to build anew from the dark foundations of its past. But for now, there was a sense of closure, a peace that had been a long time coming. I looked back at the school one last time, imagining her spirit now at rest, the halls free of her mournful presence. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and whispering through the grass, as if in approval. As I walked away, the school behind me seemed to stand a little brighter, the shadows less menacing. I knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, it felt hopeful. The truth had been revealed, justice served, and a haunted school found its peace, a fitting end to a night that had changed everything. As I walked away from the school, the weight of everything that had occurred felt like a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. The cool breeze of early morning carried with it a promise of peace, yet the echoes of the past whispered through the swaying branches, reminding me that some tales never truly end. I turned back for one last look at the imposing structure that had held so much terror and sorrow. The rising sun cast long shadows across its face, painting it with a light that seemed too pure for such a place. Just then, a sudden chill descended, and the air grew inexplicably cold. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure at the window of the old building. It was her, the apparition, looking out over the grounds. Her gaze met mine, piercing and solemn. The wind picked up, swirling around me, as if carrying her words directly into my mind. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice clear despite the distance. I nodded, a mix of relief and sadness filling me. "You're free now," I murmured, though I knew she couldn't hear me. Her silhouette faded as the sunlight grew stronger, the window now showing only the empty room behind it. It seemed that her spirit had finally found the peace she deserved. But as I turned to leave, a sudden unease gripped me. The wind whispered again, colder now, more urgent. I stopped, a feeling of dread creeping up my spine. Turning slowly, I faced the school once more. The window where she had appeared was clear, but now, Other windows filled with faces, faces of sorrow, longing, and despair. The school was old, its history marred by more than one tragic tale, and it seemed that not all its ghosts had been laid to rest. My heart raced as the realization hit me. Freeing her was only the beginning. The school was a nexus for the unquiet dead, a place of unresolved tragedies and restless spirits. As I stood there, the faces watched me, their expressions a silent plea for help. I knew then what I had to do. Returning to the school wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. These spirits, like her, needed someone to hear their stories, to help them find peace. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the task ahead. As I approached the school again, the ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet, the air thick with anticipation. The front doors, once a barrier to the unknown, now stood open as if inviting me in. With every step, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices from the past, each clamoring to be heard. Inside, the hallways were dim, the early morning light struggling to penetrate the gloom. The air was cool and still, heavy with the scent of old wood and whispered secrets. I moved slowly, listening to the voices, trying to understand their stories. Each classroom I passed seemed to hold its own tale of woe. Desks and chairs were arranged as if waiting for students who would never return. In one room, the chalkboard still bore the marks of lessons long forgotten, the dust of decades undisturbed. And always, the faces in the windows, watching, waiting. The deeper I ventured, the more intense the sensations became. Cold spots in the middle of rooms, sudden gusts of wind in closed spaces, and always the voices, now pleading, now demanding attention. My skin prickled with every step, the atmosphere charged with eerie energy. Finally, I reached the heart of the school, the old library. It was here that the air felt heaviest, the whispers loudest. Books lay scattered about, their pages turned to chapters of history and horror. And in the center of the room, a circle of chairs, as if set for a meeting that had never ended. I sat down, pulling out my recorder and laying it on the table. "I'm here to listen," I said aloud. "Tell me your stories, so I can help you find peace." The air stirred, and a book fell to the floor, opening to a page marked by an old, faded photograph. It was a picture of the school, taken years ago, the faces of students blurred by time. But their eyes seemed to stare out at me, imploring. One by one, the spirits began to speak, their voices overlapping, weaving a tapestry of tragedy and hope. Each story was a thread in the fabric of the school's haunted history, each spirit a soul waiting to be acknowledged, understood, and finally released. And as I listened, ready to record their tales, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road to peace would be long and fraught with sorrow, but it was a journey I had to undertake. For them, for her, and for the shadows that danced in the corners of my own heart. The whispers grew softer, the faces in the windows slowly fading as the sun climbed higher. And as I recorded each word, each plea, I felt a strange peace settle over me. This was my purpose, my path. And though the task was daunting, it was mine to complete. The stories of the past needed to be told, and I was here to ensure they were never forgotten.